Welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to give a complete guide on aquarium plants for beginners. Plants are a great thing to add to your aquarium because not only do they look great, they are also very natural, which makes the fish feel a lot more comfortable, and they help to keep the water clean. I'll start off by talking about epiphyte or rhizome plants. These are the types of plants that do not need to be planted in the substrate. They can just be attached to a piece of wood or a rock. Common ones would be Anubias and Java fern, but there are many more and even loads of different species of Anubias. These plants are usually very easy to care for, which makes them ideal for a beginner. They usually like lower light and they grow quite slowly. They're called rhizome plants because they have a rhizome that will spread along the surface they are on, sending out new leaves along the rhizome. To propagate them, you can just cut the rhizome, making sure there's at least 3 leaves on the bit you've cut off. Or on Java ferns, sometimes they will make little baby plantlets, which you can just pinch off and replant. A common mistake that people make with epiphyte plants to kill them is as soon as they get them, they plant them in the substrate rather than attaching them to a rock or a piece of wood. If you bury the rhizome, it will rot and the plant will die. There are many different types of Anubias, ranging from the Anubias barteri, which is the biggest one I have, all the way down to this little Anubias nana petite bonsai, which is tiny. But I also have Anubias coffeefolia and Anubias pinto and normal Anubias nana petite. Anubias are slow growing and like low light, so as you can see here, since this one is in full on light, it has a bit of algae on top. They are pretty prone to algae. So if you're going to get some Anubias, I recommend to put it in a low light tank or at the bottom of a deep tank underneath other plants, providing shadow. This will ensure that you won't get any algae, but it'll still be a very healthy plant. There are a few other types of epiphyte plants, just like this African water fern and these bucephalanders, and they're all very similar in care. All great, easy beginner plants that I highly recommend. Epiphyte plants are water column feeders. This means that they get their food or nutrients from the water rather than the substrate. This is good because it means you don't need a nutrient-rich substrate, and they will usually be able to live off the fish poo alone, but sometimes you'll need to add liquid fertilizers for them. Sometimes their roots will grow long enough that they will reach down into the substrate, and then they will be able to feed off the water and the substrate. Now onto a massive group of plants called stem plants. These are very popular as they tend to be easy to care for, fast growing, and look great. Common ones would be plants like Rotala, hornwort, and hygrophila. Those types will usually just grow tall, and they are easy to recognize as they all have the central stem with lots of little leaves coming out, but there are many other types of stem plants as well. What makes a stem plant is the ability to cut it at any point in the stem, replant it, and it will form a new plant. This is a huge advantage. It means you can start with a couple of stems and end up with a full tank of one type of plant, just by cutting and replanting. Every time you cut, the stem branches out into 2 new stems as well, so if you keep on trimming, you'll end up with a very bushy plant. Most stem plants are also water column feeders, but since they grow so much faster than the Anubias and Java fern, they also use the nutrients a lot faster. This can be really useful if you're trying to outcompete algae in your aquarium. It can also mean that you might have to add some liquid fertilizers to keep the plant healthy. Stem plants can also just be floated in the water as they don't need a substrate because they take all their nutrients from the water column. Overall, they're a great type of plant for filling up space, looking great, and keeping the water clean. Another massive group of plants are floating plants. These have to be the easiest plants that exist in the hobby. As you can tell from their name, the leaves just float on the water surface with the roots going into the water, which also means they take all their nutrients from the water column. But they grow very, very fast and they can completely cover your tank in no time, especially duckweed. This is good because it'll completely outcompete algae, and also fish love when they have a lot of surface cover. Some common ones would be duckweed, azolla, salvinia, and water lettuce. If you're a beginner and you're looking for the easiest way to keep your nitrates low, floating plants are definitely the best option. One thing to take note of with floating plants is that some people say that they won't survive in a tank with a lid, although I can prove that they do survive in a tank with a lid as I have them in 2 tanks that have lids. But if you are keeping them and they're dying and you have a tank with a lid, that might be the reason. Now onto one of the biggest groups of plants, the rooted plants. Some of the most common ones would be the Amazon swords and Vallisneria. These are the ones that are planted in the substrate. Advantages of this is that they won't need a liquid fertilizer. You can just feed them with root tabs or a nutrient-rich substrate. One thing to remember is that whenever you're planting swords, you make sure you do not bury the crown, as it will rot and the plant will die. But if you remember this, it will be a very healthy plant and easy to care for. Some easy and common beginner rooted plants would be things such as Amazon swords, Vallisneria, and crypts. Crypts do well in low light as well, which makes them very easy to look after. Most rooted plants will propagate by sending out runners. For example, a mother plant Amazon sword, which is just a big Amazon sword, will send out little runners through the substrate, which will pop up as a new baby Amazon sword plant. Then you can just disconnect these from the mother plant, move them around, replant them, and it'll grow into another Amazon sword. Overall, rooted plants are definitely a good option for beginners, as they are easy to take care of. In terms of feeding them, you don't need a liquid fertilizer, just root tabs or a nutrient-rich substrate. And they also look very good, and things like Amazon swords and Vallisneria are great as background plants to fill up space. Finally, moss. The most common type of moss would be Java moss. It is a very versatile plant and great for beginners. My favourite way to use Java moss is tying it onto rocks or stones, but you can also use super glue to stick it onto different decorations. You can also just drop it in your tank and let it find wherever it wants to grow, or it can just be floated. It grows pretty fast and has a lot of little tiny leaves, which makes it a great area for beneficial bacteria to grow, helping to keep the water clean. Moss is a great thing to have in a shrimp tank or a breeding tank, as it'll have a lot of little microorganisms living in it that the newly hatched fish will love to eat, and so will the shrimp. It's a great thing to use if you're trying to make unnatural decorations, or decorations that have like a straight edge, like this piece of wood here, look a lot more natural. So for any beginners that want to have something in their tank that'll just completely take over, make the whole thing look like a jungle, Java moss or any type of moss is definitely your best bet. Very easy to care for, doesn't need any fertilizers, doesn't need much light. Overall, a great plant for any beginner. Hopefully after watching this video, you want to add plants to your tank. The fish will love it, you will love it, and it's just an overall great decision that you won't regret. Thanks for watching, have a great day, see you later.